Why isn't this red? Well, because of this. If you're new to CSS, this might feel broken. However, each time we have conflicting rules in CSS, it's going to decide which rule wins. And it's important to know the rules which are used to decide the winner. In this video, we are going to go over exactly how CSS decides the color of this text, and after you have been through this, you are not never going to have bugs in CSS again. I am going to break down the concept in extremely simple manner, and after watching this video, you will be able to tell exactly how CSS or a browser is going to decide the style of an element. Consider the same code we have previously. The color of this text is blue, even though we explicitly added a p tag defining that it should be red. And also we added a p style after the dot text style. Therefore, it probably should take priority, but it's not going to. Inside the browser, we have a lot of rules that decide what to do when you have conflicting styles in CSS. If I go ahead and inspect this element, it's going to show me a few styles in DevTools, and as you can see, it shows me both the color blue and the color red. But the browser is telling me that it's not going to apply the color red. As you can see, it marked it with a strike through, and there it added the color blue. But if I go back and I add something else, maybe something like text align center, my text is still going to get center. Because the browser now doesn't have to fight about which rule gets first, we have a single text alignment. We know that the text has to be center. But if I go back and inside my class add another style called text align left, our text is back on the left because this class defined that our code or our text is going to be on left. Every time we have code like this in CSS, the browser uses some very simple rules to decide which one takes priority. We are going to learn only 4 of those rules, and this is going to cover 99% of the cases that we can encounter. The very first rule that we are going to learn is more detail is better than less detail, or more specific is better than less specific. Basically, consider that we used this p selector and we specified that it should have a style. Then we went back and applied a different style using a class selector. Since a class is more specific than a p tag, you can have a lot of p tags on a page, but you are going to have a few classes. Therefore, it's going to prioritize a class over a p tag. Therefore, if I go back and I replace that with a class, something like text thread, and then I replace that with the p selector, this one is going to be applied. This is exactly what we learned and exactly what we saw. Since a class is more specific, you will have less classes than p tags. This is going to take priority. Similarly, let's consider id. If I add something like id equals to text dash blue and then go ahead and select text dash blue, text dash, let's do that text dash black instead. And here I am going to do color black, save, and now this becomes black. Even if I go back and remove that class or move that over a class, the ID is still going to take priority. And it's pretty simple. You can have a lot of p tags on a page. You are going to have a few classes and you are going to have only one ID. Therefore, an ID selector is going to take preference over a class selector, and then a class selector is going to take preference over a tag selector, and so on. Similarly, what if I do this? Let's consider that we have this text dash blue, color blue. I added my color blue class here. Let's go back, and then I added dot text dash red class here, color red, and then I add both red and blue classes. And now this is blue. And even if I take those classes and shuffle them around, this is still going to be blue. Because what matters here is the order of these two rules. The last rule is going to take priority. Let's skip this for now. But the thing I want to show you is that we can actually make it more specific by telling it to select only p tags with text as red class. So if I do this, this is just a CSS selector which selects all p tags with class of text dash red. And now if I save, it goes back to red because we explicitly specified that p tags with text dash red class should be selected, and this is a lot more detail. And there we simply specified a class, we didn't specify a tag, therefore it's not going to take as much priority. This is not as much specific as this one. So this is the first rule. More detail is better than less detail. More detail is going to take priority, or in other words, more specific is better than, oops, sorry, my bad. More specific is better than less specific. This is the first rule, which is incredibly simple. The more data you have in your selector and the more detail you put in your selector, the more priority, the more preference your selector is going to have. And that brings us to our second rule. The second rule is the closer an element, the higher the priority. If you bring the style closer to an element, if you have maybe external styles, you can maybe bring them internally. If you have internal styles, you can inline them. The closer you bring these styles to an element, the more preference it's going to take. And this one is slightly more confusing because it kind of conflicts with the first one. But let me still try to explain it. Let's consider that we have our classes. I am going to go ahead and add a style tag, and here I am going to add color black. And if we go back, a color is back to black because of two reasons. First of all, this is the most specific style of code you could write. You couldn't write anything more specific than, well, I want to style this p tag exactly. Therefore, once you add the inline style, it's always going to take preference. And also for the second preference, it's the closest you can get to the actual p element. But if I give you another example, let's consider that I define a style like p color blue. I am going to remove all classes, all styles, save, go back, and our paragraph is successfully blue. Now I am going to create a new file called style.css. Here I am going to specify p color black, and then I include it. I am going to add the link tag like we learned previously, add style.css, and now if I go back to the link tag, it's still going to be blue, because this is closer to our p tag. This is internal, this one is external. Therefore, it's closer to our p tag compared to this style. But what if I pick this up and I move that after my style tag? Well, it's going to take preference. And this is something which is incredibly important. Once I pick this style and move this after this style tag, it gets closer to my elements. And it's not because my p tag is written here. Even if I take it and do something like this, now this style tag is closer to the p tag. However, since I loaded my link later, it's still closer to my p tag. It's still closer to HTML since it's loaded later, and it's going to take preference. This might be slightly confusing, so just remember that the closest we can get to an element by inlining a style, the stronger our elements can get. And now let's move on to the third and the most important rule. Finally, the last principle that you need to remember is simply later elements carry more priority. What this means is if you have two elements with exactly the same rules, the one that appears later in the file has higher priority. If we have an style tag, for example, and we include a link tag after it, the link tag is going to carry more priority. But if we take this link tag and put it before our style tag is going to take more priority. And I can even take the style tag. Let's take another example by adding the link tag after the style again. And the next thing I'm going to do is that I am going to take this and put it just before the closing of the body tag. And this is going to apply the same style even though our link element appears closer. However, our style tag is at the end of the document and it carries higher priority. Therefore, this idea, and it's called specificity by the way, is simply controlled by those three principles. If your selector is more specific, it carries more detail and targets less element, it's going to carry more priority. It's going to have higher weight in the browser. Next, inline style is the highest priority. Or the closer you move the style to an element, the higher the priority it's going to carry. And finally, the later the style appears, the higher the priority is going to be. And it's pretty simple. If you try that out a few times, that would be pretty apparent. If it's not, watch the video once more, practice out the concepts by yourself, and it's going to be pretty clear. And once you understand the concept, you are never going to have bugs where your CSS simply doesn't work anymore. However, there's just one last thing that we need to learn, and this is this important element. Let's go back. Our paragraph is back to black. And if we want this element, this selector to carry the highest possible priority, we can, after this blue, type exclamation mark important. And we're basically telling the CSS that this style is very important. We need to apply it in any case. And it's going to ignore all rules and style it as now. However, there are a few important caveats that you should know. First of all, when you apply important, any other style will not be able to override it. You can try inline style, you can try IDs, you can try class selectors. This is not going to get any more prioritized than this important tag here. So if you edit this important attribute and there's another developer who is trying to make this paragraph black, he couldn't find this important element. There are thousands of line of code in your file. Then basically he is going to go back and he is going to add important here too. And once this is important, CSS is going to go back to our previous tools and this is going to be back to black. But now everyone is confused, everything is important and nothing is important. Therefore, we should avoid using important as much as possible and instead rely on the previous three principles to properly specify more weight for our style.